fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCOU 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Joe Goldberg.
I'm in the house.
What are you doing in the house? Yeah.
I am talking. I'm doing the radio show. I'm looking forward to this. I'm going to learn some more stuff today.
About time.
I always take, that's true. I always take my notes. You know that.
Yeah, because you've got to start learning, you know.
It's called plagiarism.
I'm not touching that. We've got a mystery, thriller, suspense writer. And let's talk about her new book. So it's called Bright and Deadly Things. And let's welcome Lexie Elliott. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was looking at your history, and it says that you started writing after losing your bank job. Is this correct? So, like, that's when you started kind of looking at writing as a career?
Yeah, I'd always written. I wanted to write from as soon as I understood that, you know, books had authors. Even when I was really young, I would take into my primary school teacher some little stories that I'd written. So it'd always been a dream of mine. And I'd had a little bit of success in short story competitions, but then in 2008, I lost my job in the global financial crisis, like so many people who were working in the financial industry did. And I thought, okay, maybe that was the time to give novel writing a crack. And it took me a really long time because I had 2 young children at home, and I also then got another job in the finance world. So it took me a really long time to get a novel finished. But ultimately that became my debut novel, The French Girl.
Is there something that gave you let's say the confidence to decide to actually publish a book like The French Girl?
I think that what I had all of a sudden was time. And I'd been running really, really hard, a very kind of long hours, 24/7 job in the city. And suddenly I had time because I kept my nanny on because I was hoping to get another job. So, I was able to spend a little bit of time each day actually thinking, okay, let's sit down, let's write. And once I suppose I'd really gotten into the project, then even when I got a job, ultimately, I kept it going on the side and eventually got there. But the thing that really gave me the confidence was getting an agent, because I think at that point, you know, agents are like gatekeepers for the publishing houses. So, you know, once you get one, you feel like you're one step closer to actually getting a publishing contract. And my agent particularly, she's been an editor in her time, and so she was able to help me a lot on, you know, cleaning up the manuscript to make sure that it presented in the best possible way.
So did you have confidence even though you had all that writing time? You know, it sounds like you've been writing since you can remember. But did you feel with The French Girl you had enough confidence in it?
Look, I think I've always had a certain level of self-belief that if I just stuck at it hard enough, that eventually I'd get there. Maybe not with that project. Maybe it'd be another book or another book after that. But if I just kept going long enough and, you know, threw enough mud at the wall, eventually something would stick. And I don't know whether that's confidence or kind of blind naivety, but I certainly felt that I should stick at it and that it was something that eventually would come good for me. Yeah, I can't really explain where that came from, but it's how I felt.
Did any of that come from your background, which is, of course, you've never done anything in your life? You're just an Oxford PhD in theoretical physics. By the way, my brother's an MIT grad in theoretical physics, too, so we can talk about that. But so that's a scientific background. You're long distance swimmer, you're an athlete. All those things take a skill. They take dedication. They take all those things. You transport that to writing, right? So how did you train to be a writer?
Yeah, I think people always say that you train to be a writer by reading, and I think that's true to an extent. And I certainly read an enormous amount as a child, as a teenager, and so forth. I actually feel at this point in my life I'm reading the least that I've ever read, because it's very difficult to do alongside writing. I tend to pick up the voice of whatever I'm reading and then have to completely rewrite my chapters the next day when they just don't work anymore. But the disciplines are a really good point. The sports that I've tended to do better in have been things that have required a lot of discipline, a lot of time. I suppose you could say that the sort of 10,000 hours concept, if you put 10,000 hours into anything, you will become, fairly expert at it. And maybe that's true too, but I certainly wasn't afraid of putting in a lot of time into the writing, and I wasn't afraid of it taking a long time before anything came to fruition. So yeah, I suppose there's a certain overlap in that, and I also think the other thing where there's an overlap is with the PhD experience, where when you're doing a PhD, nobody has the answers anymore. It's not like you can just go to some professor in your university and say, I'm a bit stuck here. Can you help me on this one? Because, you're doing something new. That's the very nature of doing a PhD. And so you have to find a way to just kind of crack on and rely on yourself. And I think there's an element of that in novel writing as well.
So in science, you may have a hypothesis that physics, how fast can this let time go? So you have something to start with. When you're starting the book, did you have an idea going forward? Did you have a theory or hypothesis going forward, saying, I got a title, I got an idea, let me just rip with it because I don't know where I'm going, kind of like in the science? With
my first novel, I wrote fairly freely. I sort of knew what the beginning was and what the end was, but I was really fuzzy on the middle. That hasn't entirely changed in my later novels. I generally do know very clearly what the beginning is. Normally, I know the first sentence, and I always know the last scene. I can see it quite clearly in my head. But now I'm forced by my publisher to write outlines for them. So, 5 to 7 pages. So it maps it out a little more carefully, but it's still a bit more amorphous. And I think I can take different paths through it, and often do. I mean, I guess the major beats that probably match the outline, but often something quite big might be, happening, or that wasn't in the outline. So I've been forced to be a bit more disciplined about the planning process.
So what comes first? Is it the character or the story?
It's the setting for me. I feel like, I need to have a setting and a sense of atmosphere, and that needs to be really nailed down. And until I have that, the characters don't appear. It's almost as if they need a landscape to walk around in before they can reveal themselves to me.
You have character-driven, you have plot-driven, you have setting-driven. And your settings are like the latest book is in the chalet, and you've been in all these different places. And so it seemed to me that sense of setting, especially when you have a theme which is close quarter, sort of psychological thriller mystery things, that setting is critical, and you can stick the characters in there, and the plot and other things will come. Am I wrong on that? Am I misreading how you're writing?
No, I think you're right that the setting is really pivotal rather. But I do think I write character-driven stories. So it's really important to me that the arc of the characters is authentic, and that you don't kind of scream and hurl the book across the room going, nobody in their right mind would do that, which I'm sure we've all done on reading certain novels or on watching certain television shows, So yeah, I think I write character-driven mysteries, psychological thrillers, but the way in which the process works for me is that I start from a setting and a sense of atmosphere that I find really intriguing, that keeps pulling me back to it, and then the characters will kind of grow out of that.
in a sense, maybe your setting is a character. Like you write it like a character?
It certainly has been the case for this novel, for Bright and Deadly Things, and for, certain of my other novels, you would say that. So in Bright and Deadly Things, the chalet itself, where it's set, the chalet is in the French Alps, Chalet des Anglais, it very much is a character in its own right, and I think you would say the same about the manse in my second novel, The Missing Years.
So do you find you have to get to the locations or the places you're writing and the settings? Have you had to visit them in order to write about them?
I think I have to have had a visit there. With Bright and Deadly Things, the Chalet des Anglais is actually a real place. And I was lucky enough to be invited there when I was doing my PhD at Oxford. It's a very rustic chalet, no running water, no electricity, which is set in the French Alps. And it's owned by 3 Oxford colleges, and each of those colleges run reading parties during each summer, and I was lucky enough to be invited. Spent a week there. Nobody died. It was a completely lovely experience. We did a lot of walking. We did a lot of academic reading. Well, I mean, maybe I didn't do as much academic reading as I should have done. I certainly enjoyed the local red wine and just had a lovely time, but it had a very specific atmosphere, a very particular atmosphere at nighttime that stuck with me. And so that really was what I wanted to capture, because I wanted to set a thriller in the world of Oxford academia, but I didn't want to do something that was, just a kind of standard campus thriller. And this suddenly occurred to me as being the perfect way of doing that, of exploring the world of Oxford academia, but in a slightly different setting. That's where the chalet came from for me.
So now your main characters, the center of the attention, so to speak. How do you create your characters, or do you have sort of an explanation of how they come about? I
don't know that I do. They sort of just kind of present themselves to me. I could do some reverse engineering and say a little bit about them. Like, for example, the main character in this novel is Dr. Emily Rivers, and she's an Oxford Fellow, and she's working in the area of theoretical physics. And I could very intellectually tell you, well, that makes sense, because, if I'm going to write authentically about, somebody's work experience, it would need to be, an area that I have good knowledge of. I don't think, for example, I could write authentically about somebody who is, a fellow in history. I just don't quite know what their life would look like, what their department experiences would look like, whereas I know very much what a theoretical physics department feels and breathes like. That is in some ways the intellectual reason for it, but that isn't how it happened. I didn't make those decisions. She just presented to me like that. And she presented to me as, her husband had recently died, and I had to find out about her husband in the same way that the readers find out about her husband, through her memories and her flashbacks. That's the way in which he came to me, only through her. How do you experience your characters? Do you see them, hear them, feel them? Like, what experience is it for you? I definitely hear them in some way, because when they come to give me suggestions of actors for the audiobooks, I'm quite specific about, no, that's just not right, or, oh yeah, that's perfect, so I definitely hear them. I see them in the sense that I could describe them, but I think I more sort of walk inside their shoes, so I maybe see and feel things the way that they do. And you put your main character, into a space with a group of people. So how do you deal with group dynamics in those closed space? How important is that to you as you're creating that? Well, I think group dynamics are hugely fascinating. They're one of the things that I really like exploring in my writing. And it's not just the interactions, it's also what happens if you take somebody out of that group, and how does that cause an imbalance, and how does the group sort of rearrange itself around that missing person. I found all of that really fascinating. So yeah, it was a real attraction to me that I had a space in which I was able to put a group of people. And it was important for this that I have characters from all different levels within university, all different strata, if you like, of university life, from undergraduates right the way through to, you know, quite senior professors. Partly because that actually mirrors how the real reading parties do work, and partly because I was interested in that, because, you know, as I started thinking more and more about you know, this setup for this book, I was exploring also, you know, my own experiences at university, and I was thinking about the fact that whilst I was there, and I was at Oxford as an undergraduate as well as a graduate, whilst it was there, I was aware that my graduate experience was very different to my undergraduate experience. You know, you have different concerns and worries, and you're there in the summer when the undergraduates have gone, and it's quite a different place. You become more of a sort of, you know, 9-to-5 worker, because you keep working through the holidays and so forth. But I hadn't really extended my thinking to think about the fact that it's a different place for postgraduates, a different place for junior fellows versus very kind of senior professors, that your experience of the community and the place that you're living in is very different depending on which stage you are in your university life. And it was interesting to me to put all those different people together in this one confined space, and then watch them kind of struggle a bit with the fact that they were kind of in a work environment, but kind of not, and trying to work out what the real rules are when you know, it's like going on I don't know if you've ever been on a work party trip, or, you know, I remember going on a work skiing trip and just thinking it was terrible because nobody really knew the rules. So were you allowed to beat the boss down the mountain, or did you have to hang back? What was the rules?
How much do you think how much of yourself do you put into, let's say, the main character, Emily Rivers? How much do you think of yourself are you letting other people see?
Look, nobody can write a book that is not in some way coloured by their own experiences. I mean, it's just not something that's possible to do. But I would say that Emily is a very, very different character to me. She certainly has a similar background in terms of her academic experience. And I would think that the fact that she's recently experienced a loss was probably driven by the fact that my mum died not too long before I started this project. So I'm sure that was kind of lingering in me, and, you know, I wanted to do an authentic expression and depiction of grief, if you like. So there's obviously ways in which I bring myself to her, or bits of me that she has taken with her. But no, she is very different. I'm not as reserved, and I'd like to think I'm as resilient as she is, but I don't know. I've never had to experience some of the things that she's had to experience.
How do each one of these books, when you finish them, how do you think it changes you? It's an interesting thing, and it doesn't happen immediately, because I think, you know, you finish the first draft and you're aware there's going to be a second draft, and, you know, the second draft is where you can put in some real magic and make sure that it becomes really the best thing possible. But then after that, you go into things like, you know, there's copy edit, and then there's first pass and second pass, and, you know, by the time the book actually turns up in print, I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm pretty damn sick of the thing. I've read it so many times, and I need a period, and I usually get it because it's such a long time between, you know, the last time you read it through and it actually coming out in print. You know, there's such a long lead time these days. I need a period just to kind of get away from it and come back to it. Now I'm very enthusiastic about talking about it, and I see different things that I maybe didn't see before.
So let me ask you a question during that time frame about your support system and your support process. the family. You used to have a job, then you didn't have a job, and then you work at home, or you go out and write, or there's all this support as you're going. How does that help you or hinder you when you're trying to put all this together during that process?
Before the pandemic, I never wrote at home. I would always go and write somewhere else. And then the pandemic hit, and clearly I had to learn to write at home, or otherwise I'd never written another word. So I have become much better at writing at home. And now I'd say I probably write at home 50, 60% of the time. But my support system is a kind of an interesting one, because my main focus now that I don't work part-time. I worked part-time in the city up until about a year and a half ago. But now I'm a full-time writer. And so one of the things that's really important for me to do is actually find some adult conversation in a day. My husband is traveling with work often. My kids are at boarding school, so there are swathes of time where they're not actually around. So it's important to me to make sure that I meet friends to go and do exercise and catch up with people and so forth. And those are kind of like the building blocks that I have to have in place to feel like I'm being healthy and functioning properly. And then, when I sit down to write, I often find now, because I've got, as I say, often an empty house, that if I'm not careful, I can keep going too long. So I have to cut myself off. And I try and do any admin or chores that I need to do before I sit down to write, because once I do, I'm probably lost down a rabbit hole for a little while, right? So, if there's something important, it needs to get done first.
I got a lot of problems, and I got that problem too. Give me a reason not to be sitting here.
But with the pandemic, when that's going on and things change and things are really dark, let's say the atmosphere around you and outside of the world, right? It's all kind of pretty intense. Do you think that seeps into your writing, or do you have an issue writing or concentrating on what you're trying to write with things like that going on?
I can do. What I found with the pandemic was more that I couldn't focus on things like reading a book or watching a series on Netflix or anything. I just couldn't really sort of get invested in anything like that. But the writing remained a bit of a refuge, I think. It must be the case that what you're experiencing around you does seep in. And certainly I don't think any of us are kind of unscathed by that experience. But in certain ways, we as a family, we had a kind of nice time. My eldest had just gone to boarding school, and suddenly he was back with us, and we were like all four of us together, and we happened to have glorious weather. And we're lucky enough to have a garden. So it's a time that thankfully the boys look back on with a certain amount of fondness. So we are fortunate in that it wasn't something that, we felt was dark every single day. Although obviously, you couldn't escape the fact that it was a really tough time for an awful lot of people, and that, almost all of us have, suffered some loss in that scenario, in that situation.
Yeah, and on top of a global pandemic and the mental stress you're talking about, I think most of us have the advantages and disadvantages of our lives as we're trying to write. You've had a lot of advantage, a lot of hard work, and you're a scientist. That's your bread, and that's where you come from. That's the core of your being, and that's a certain thought process. Writing and being creative, is that a different thought process? Was there advantages or different disadvantages as coming from a scientific discipline to a writing creative discipline?
They are different in certain ways. I think that the scientific discipline helps with the writing. Look, when you're working on something in science, you're kind of holding the whole problem in your head and looking at it from different angles. And I think when you're building a universe for a novel, you're holding that universe and all those characters and in your head in a very similar way. but really where it comes in more, I think, is just, I'm quite disciplined, and a lot of that comes from, the kind of fairly rigorous academic background, and then going on into, working in the financial industry where you had to meet deadlines, you had to be professional, everything had to be dotted the I's and crossing the T's, and that work ethos, I suppose, translates across into, the way I've approached my writing as well. But I mean, yeah, I think that they are different sides of me, but I don't have a problem with being lots of different things. I'm a mother, I'm an athlete, I'm a writer, sometimes I'm a financial consultant. I want to be lots of different things. I don't see why I have to just be one.
Do you have a subtext or some sort of a meaning or something underneath your story, or perhaps you've written it into the setting in itself? Is there something that you want people to get out of the book besides the entertainment?
I think that the wonderful things about writing psychological thrillers is that they provide a really great structure, almost like a scaffolding that you can have in place that helps the story hang together, that helps you move on at pace and so forth, but then allows you to just hang on to that, to add on to that structure anything that you want to investigate. And there's always things I want to investigate. It's around, human connections and, how people treat each other within a group, how they might manage familiarity, and in Bright and Deadly Things, there's certainly an element of how you manage grief, and how you move on, and make your life meaningful beyond a loss like that. There's a strong element of being true to yourself and thinking very hard about your own actions and what you might be proud or less proud of. Throughout the novel, there's people who, I don't want to give away too much, but there's people who are maybe not so proud of what they've done, and they have to live with that. So, yeah, I think there's always in my novels something more, because they're character driven, and characters are messy and complex and have interesting things that we can learn from them.
But Lexie, you said scaffolding. Tell me about your supernatural vibes and themes that I kind of sense as a symbolism underneath your writing. Is that on purpose, or does that just develop as you're putting these people and places together?
It always just comes, I don't know exactly where from, whether maybe it comes from having had a heady mix of reading in my teenage years, where I was like, I loved fantasy, but I loved mysteries, and, I read really widely across the spectrum, but, fantasy and mysteries were my bread and butter. So, I guess there's an element where it just kind of sneaks in, but in this particular one, I mean, there's a theme, I guess, related to the beat of time, which Emily is very aware that her grief is almost like robbing her of time. She's not living her life, and who knows how long we all have on this planet, but she's not living it to the full. And that sort of, that concern about time manifested itself in, an actual clock within the chalet. But it built out its part, shall we say. And that wasn't in the outline, that's something that grew.
So when you're getting into the head of the person that's, let's say, the evil character or the bad person, the one that does the awful thing, let's say, that's usually setting behind the missing bodies or the murder and stuff like that, how do you get into that mindset to be able to write that character where it's believable?
Well, you see, I like all my characters, even the ones who do things that you really hope you wouldn't in that situation. And I think to make them authentic, you have to understand them. So the reader has to understand how they got there. And, as I say, hopefully they wouldn't make the same choices themselves, but they can see how somebody might make those choices. And I think that's maybe a reflection of my view on the world. I don't think anyone is entirely evil. I don't think anyone is entirely good either. I think we're all kind of a mix of, better angels and demons, and we try to do the right thing, and hopefully we do the right thing more often than not. But, we all have the capacity to do some really, really dreadful things, and we all have the capacity to do some wonderful things. And the interesting thing is, how these people react to the circumstances that they're put in and what their choices are in those specific situations.
Okay, well, you mentioned readers. How do you, as you're writing, want to interact with your readers? What are you thinking about your readers as you're writing, if you do?
When I'm thinking about my readers, which is mostly I'm writing and just trying to, get down what is going through my head. But sometimes I think, okay, I'm bored by this, so my reader's going to be bored by this. And then I have to go back and look at what I'm doing and say, and sometimes you come back to it and you go, I actually don't even need that section. I can jump to here and explain it in a different way. And, if I'm getting bogged down in some kind of exposition or some kind of transition from one scene to another scene, then if it comes into my head that the reader will be bored, that's a sign to me that I need to, look at that again. Obviously you hope that your readers are going to absolutely love everything you write, but I don't think I can keep that in my head while I'm writing, because I feel like someone was looking on my shoulder the whole time, and that would be deeply uncomfortable.
How do you interact with your readers? Now you talk about this. Do you have social media set up? Do you have a website? Where do people go to find you?
Yeah, I have a website, LexieElliott.com, and I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook on Lexie Elliott Writes is the handle. And I'm on Twitter, but I'm not a great tweeter.
I noticed. I followed you today. You know a lot of things out there. Work harder on that.
I think, Instagram feels more natural to me. Look, I'm not a Generation Z. Are we on Z? What are we on these days? So,
there's a name, Alphas, I think.
Yeah. I'm clearly, I was a teenager in the 80s, the 90s. So, social media is not something that I feel comfortable with. Clearly it's something that I need to engage with. I love talking to people live about books. I love having any engagement, emails, whatever, with readers, but I just find social media to be something that I'm not natural at. Much rather be doing this, right? We're having a conversation. This feels like something I can manage, but social media, I have to work quite hard to make sure I remember to do stuff on social media.
I'm following you now. I'm watching you.
Look out.
Let me ask you one question, because you said something there that sparked another thought. My page of notes going on here. Do you let people read any of your things while you're writing it? Do you read it to your husband, or acting out with your kids, or say, hey, friend from college, what do you think of this passage? Or is it just, hey, I'm reading my book, I'm in a secret zone, stay away from me?
Yeah, I don't have anyone who reads apart from my agent before it goes to the publisher. But my agent is a really great first reader, and she has really great comments. So that's the process. And she sometimes gets it, half done. Well, to be honest, I usually go through a period of anxiety and neurosis at about 20,000 words. And so she'll read and say, no, keep going. You're doing fine. But that's usually the point at which I want to throw my hands up in the air and just throw the laptop in the lake or something. But, nobody else. My husband's a lawyer. He reads for a living. The last thing he wants to do is come home and, get through my stuff. He reads the books when they are books on a shelf. I'm not someone who has a big stable of readers. And I think that that now I would feel uncomfortable with that, because I've never done it. I don't know what other people's processes are, but it doesn't seem to be something that I feel an urge to do.
Do you think that'll affect you when you get reviews and stuff? Do you follow up what people say about your books online? Speaking of all those subjects, Do you take reviews seriously?
I try really hard not to. I just try not to go down that rabbit hole. But look, I mean, there's been some really lovely reviews, and I know because my agent has said, yeah, you can read this one, it's safe. And I've been really fortunate that the reviews for this have been really, really lovely. But on the whole, I kind of think, well, the book is the book. And I really hope people do enjoy it, but there's not much I can do about it now, right? So, and I think that when the first novel was published, The French Girl, I remember, there was this one review that was literally glowing apart from a single sentence. So you're talking about, 0.5% of the entire review said something that wasn't glowing, and I fixated on that, and it was a real lesson to me that just, try and stay away from these as much as you can, because, I don't think it's good for your mental health.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to win, because the more popular you get, and the more you get out there, the more reviews you get. You've got to get the negative ones. It's better just to look at the overall picture. That's what I find. You look at a page and you kind of go, okay, 900 reviews, and you're a 4-star. Take that.
I mean, look, I do remember actually on my second novel, there was one particularly interesting review that somebody drew my attention to. It was just a comment on Amazon, really, rather than a review. And the reviewer said, well, for the first 100 pages, I thought it was littered with spelling mistakes, and then I realized there was some Scottish dialect in there. And I was like, okay.
Dialects are hard. Yeah, I had a review once where someone was saying, yeah, Ralph, I hated that character. And then when they went on fishing trips, I don't have any Ralphs in my book. There's no fishing trips. But thank you for giving me the 1-star review. The sock puppeting killing me off. But I want to ask I always kind of ask this question because this is going through my mind as I'm writing right now, trying to get out of espionage stuff, is, do you want to get out of genre? Do you want to write the great Scottish novel, whatever? I say great American novel, but that's not going to work. But do you want to move on from psychological thrillers?
Look, I don't know that move on is the right word, because I would like to continue to do psychological thrillers, but I do think that I would like to spread my wings as well. I don't know about you guys, but certainly I wrote a novel, the French Girl, and then my publishing house told me that was a psychological thriller. But I didn't sit there going, I'm writing a psychological thriller. I just wrote a tale, and they told me what genre it went into, and that they would like more of those, please. But, if you've read in a lot of different genres, I think your mind naturally creates stories in a lot of different genres. And, I could see myself writing across different genres for sure. And in fact, I've been doing a little bit of something on the side in the fantasy genre that, may never see the light of day, but it's been quite a good, I hesitate to say palate cleanser, but I mean, it has been quite a good palate cleanser. So
your structure, are you able to just turn it on then? Can you just there's nobody around, so you can just sit down and write? Can you plan it that precisely, or do you have to be in a certain mood?
Oh, definitely not a certain mood. I'm not really a big believer in that, the muse takes you. I think it's basically about hard work and making sure that you're sitting down and putting the hours in, nobody goes to the office for their job and says, you know what, I don't really feel like doing these spreadsheets today. The mood hasn't taken me. And I think writing is, it's a profession. It's a job. You should treat it professionally and sit down and do it. And, sometimes you'll write absolute rubbish for a bit and then you'll find your pace. And there's certainly times where I've had to work really hard. It's usually at the beginning of a project. I work really hard with word targets for the day, because at the beginning of a project, you are structuring as well as writing, and it can be really, really slow. And I need that as a sort of, yes, you are making progress. Keep going, keep going. Whereas at the end, I don't even pay attention, because you're blasting through any target that you would put down.
I write nothing but nonfiction myself, but, Joe and yourself, you're writing out of your imagination completely as well, right? So it's a different sort of way of writing. That's all.
Yeah, I suppose the time that I'm less able to write is when I haven't done enough exercise. So that I find really, really helps to keep me in a kind of zone where I can, I can sit down and write now. But I tend to get a bit kind of scratchy and mutinous if I haven't done enough exercise. And so really that's a good solution to make me sit down and get on with it properly, is just go for a run first.
I had that same feeling with my raiding the refrigerator and gave me chocolate out of the pantry. I need some chocolate. Give me some chocolate. I need the Muse. Give me some Oreos.
If someone brand new was out there and looking to write, Joe was ready to take notes. So, what would you suggest for someone who wants to become a writer and get their books published and get an agent and all that? What do you think the one thing they should do is?
So it's a question that I do get asked quite often, and I think the most important thing, if you really want to make a career out of it, you want to have it be your profession, is to be professional about it. And when you're trying to write and, inevitably you have other things going on in your life, I think it's very important to ring fence the time that you're going to devote to writing. So, you wouldn't go into your job and then just, get up and go and have a coffee with somebody. Yeah, those are your working hours. You have to sit and do your job, and it's the same with the writing. If that's the time you've ring fenced for writing, you have to sit and do your writing and not let anything else interfere with that, because otherwise you just won't get to the end of a novel, right? And you've got to finish something before you've got any chance of moving forward and getting an agent and getting a publishing contract and so forth. So you just have to start off with protecting that writing time, which can be very hard because, we all have lives and families and, things going on. So that is, I would say, the first step.
What's your favorite thing about writing?
My favorite thing is when I am working on a manuscript and something happens that was entirely unplanned, whether it's, the story as a whole moves in a different direction, or a character does something that I hadn't envisaged. And I just think it's kind of like a little bit of magic, right? It's when the project is breathing and changing organically and just has a life of its own. And I don't know that I could ever explain how that happens, but, and I think for people who maybe aren't writers, they will not understand how you can be surprised by something that's coming from you. But I am, and I love it. And so it's, as we were talking about the slightly supernatural aspects, whenever that has come in, it's been like, oh, okay. And it's slightly scary too, because you're like, do I run with this? And, I think you always run with it, and you just kind of have to have faith that it's going to turn out all right.
Well, that's those voices you hear too, right? Do you hear them when you're driving, or do you wake up at night with a shovel in your hand or anything?
Wake up at night with a shovel in my hand. Goodness, you'll be terrifying my husband.
The plot of the next book is that the theoretical physicist kills the lawyer husband. He hasn't read it yet until he reads the book.
Is the husband really there? Like, we need to see proof.
Yeah. Do I hear? I definitely have lines of dialogue that will come into my head, and I try and scribble them down if I think they're worthy of trotting out at some later point. So and I have different stories or silly things. Sometimes you just hear a noise, and then something sparks, and you're like, okay, well maybe that could be a project one day. So I have a little file of complete nonsense that will probably get nowhere, but maybe some of them will be the seed that creates whatever book number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever it is.
Yeah, I have the idea file in my phone. Something comes to me, I want the notes right away. Idea, blah, 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 blah. So it's there somewhere. I'm not going to forget it, I think.
Yeah, I should do that. I should put it on the phone. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I'm here for you.
Lots of insanity.
You can have that for free.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, really appreciate you being on the show. And of course, now your newest book is called Bright and Deadly Things. And our guest, Lexie Elliott. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me? Well, good night. This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.